Godsky, everybody. There's nothing to do and there's always room for more. Sell that light and shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm going to sit down in my rented car. I'm going to jam it into drive. I'm going to head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us.
Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse Podcast. Woo! We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the network.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Welcome back, everybody, to Cannabis Chat Live, Pro Cannabis Media's weekly live chat show. It used to be talk. Remember talk, David? We used to talk. Now we chat, right?
That's it. Got to stay with it, Jimmy. You got to be up to the, you got to just stay with it, baby.
All right. Let's go with the flow, right? I get it. And we do have a chat room, and I'm monitoring it right here on our YouTube page. So if you are out there watching or listening and you want to chat, ask a question, feel free to put it on there, and I may actually notice it and answer it, or at least mention it on our show. But joining us now in our chat room, our Zoom room that we make look like the chat room, is Rick LaNeve from Accounting Buds, and also a native of New Jersey, the United States of America. Rick, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon.
Well, thanks for having me, Jimmy, again.
Well, you know what? You're a regular because you are a go-to CPA guy. You're the Accounting Buds guy. And, you know, I don't know if you heard the top of the show, but there already has been some legislation entered in. A House of Representative from Florida is trying to get it started, cannabis reform. And he's put out there something moving from Schedule 1. It's a draft, Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. David got all excited about it. And then Morgan Fox pretty much said, I don't want to have anything to do with that. We want it totally descheduled. The key to this from your perspective is the 280E thing. Can you just explain a little bit about what 280E is and how much that directly impacts cannabis businesses?
Sure. Well, 280E directly impacts pretty much everything to do with a cannabis business from an accounting perspective. What it basically is it's one or two sentences in the tax code, but it drives everything in the accounting perspective. So basically, under 280E, there's only certain expenses that you could use to reduce your income on your income taxes. And for illegal businesses, which cannabis is at the federal level,
Right.
that drastically limits the number of expenses you could take.
Right.
So basically, you're paying income taxes on almost every bit of revenue that you have as a cannabis company.
So if I understand it right, it's this one sentence clause, 77 words, means you pay taxes on your gross profit. Is that
correct? Yep.
Yeah.
Now there are some court cases out there that have come over the past few years that actually help cannabis companies and kind of take some of the teeth out of 280E, but you still have to be really careful. And myself and most accountants will advise their clients to be conservative versus aggressive when it comes to 280E, because you're still operating in what's an illegal federal environment, and they can really come down on you hard if you're on the wrong line of that.
Hey, Rick, I got a question for you.
Sure.
So the big thing in licensing up in Massachusetts is home delivery. It's going to start to roll out very soon, even though the home delivery saga just never ends up here. It is free against social equity. Litigation was filed this past week to try to stop the program. But for home delivery, let's assume that you're what they call a delivery operator, which means you're going to run like a mini Amazon for weed. You buy wholesale, and then you take orders online from consumers and deliver to their houses. In your opinion, are the delivery costs, the cost of the driver and the delivery agent who have to be in the car, the cost of the vehicle, the fuel, the monitoring, all of that stuff, do you think that's part of cost of goods sold for home delivery?
So it's an interesting question, because I actually was reading on this exact topic yesterday, a back and forth amongst a bunch of CPAs in the cannabis space. And I'll tell you right now, that is a good question, because I'm not going to give you an answer for that, because it came pretty much 50-50 was whether or not people thought that should be included or not. A lot of it has to do, to be honest with you, there's a lot of gray areas in this, so I'm going to flat out say that at the beginning as well. But a lot of it has to do with, is the company solely a delivery company or not? Are they integrated vertically anywhere else along the chain with the actual dispensary? If you're just UPS delivering this, then it's a completely different answer versus if you are someone that's growing it and delivering it.
Well, how about the one in the middle? How about if you're not UPS, right? Because we call that the courier model. You're delivering to the retailers or anybody who has authority to sell direct. But what if you're the mini Amazon? You're buying it from cultivators and product manufacturers, selling it under your license to consumers, and the consumer only gets it via home delivery. They can't come pick it up because you don't have a storefront. So
I'm going to actually not answer that one, to be honest with you. It's so hot topic right now. It's so controversial amongst CPAs themselves. And I don't have a client that I have to make a call on right now. So I don't want to publicly say one way or the other which way I would fall on that.
And by the way, this is why I say, if you're looking for a good investment in the cannabis industry, invest in a law firm, because these laws are so new, they're going to be challenged all the time. And David, you mentioned the lawsuit of the Dispensary Association in Massachusetts against the Cannabis Control Commission here. And, I read the complaint and the lawsuit today, and I got to tell you, I still am not sure exactly what is the right thing to do. So
welcome to the world of accountants too, Jimmy.
What's that?
Welcome to the world of accountants as well. We have to read those laws and interpret them all day long as well. And a lot of times there's nothing clear about it.
Right. And nobody wants to get sued, but isn't that going to be part of the history of the emerging cannabis industries? There's going to be lawsuits, and then there's going to be these precedents, right?
Well, exactly, and that's how a lot of where we're at today in the cannabis industry came about as well. I'm sure you're familiar with the dispensary out in California, Harborside. Well, if you look into the accounting literature for 280E, you're going to see Harborside, because they, while being relatively conservative in their views, were not afraid to take on the IRS on multiple occasions. And that's how a lot of the tax guidance is out there right now, is actually just looking at Harborside cases and a couple other ones similar to figure out how things were interpreted in that case versus the two sentences in the tax law that were really initially put there to catch mobsters, back in the 1920s for not paying their taxes on illegal activities.
But what would you say are like the 5 most important tax court cases for marijuana?
Put me on the spot here.
That. Now you're putting him on the spot. Like he's taking an exam, for crying out loud.
I know. Come on here.
All right.
I thought we were talking about New Jersey weed.
That's right. You got one anyway you can throw out there for him just to make
the biggest ones. The biggest ones are Harborside. I mean, those are the ones that are the giants. And there's multiple cases, and they're still ongoing. They're still fighting each other right now. There's ongoing cases that could shape the industry again.
Oh, I think they'll absolutely shape the industry, especially the one they're arguing. I think it's Harborside's arguing that if the taxes exceed their actual net income, regardless of what's deductible, that's unconstitutional because you're just taking too much.
Yeah, I mean, there's some situations out there where because the taxes are the way they are, you actually have to pay more taxes than revenues in certain situations, which is, it makes no sense.
Speaking of makes no sense, and I'm good at this subject, I just want to say, the marijuana-related businesses, and of course, Pro Cannabis Media is a marijuana-related business according to federal tax law. It seems to me that a class action suit by the MRBs against the IRS may actually have a better chance of winning than those that are plant touching licensees.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, MRBs are a step removed from the actual product, right? Like Pro Cannabis Media, you guys aren't touching any product. You're just doing interviews and videos and media. Right.
At least not on the clock, Rick. I'll be perfectly honest. Okay.
Right. But you're being, because you're being paid potentially for advertisers or whatever by a plant touching company, you get looped into a bunch of these rules as well. Now, I will say it's already less stringent for an MRB than a plant touching business. For example, going to get a bank account is much easier for an MRB than a plant touching business. But you still have to do an application that's about 25 pages long to just open a bank account. And I had to do the same thing being an accountant for potentially, plant touching business. When I first opened my doors, I didn't have a client yet. I still had to do that long application as an MRB.
Right. And we are classified at the credit union because I started at a bank and that got shut down after 6 months. Pretty much the first wire we got waved the flag. And interestingly enough, I think I've told you this story. When the safe banking, they had held the wire, for 3 weeks. Then the Safe Banking Act was actually voted on by the House that week. You remember when that happened and it passed? Interestingly enough, coincidentally, they released the wire the next day.
Yep.
Which, it'll be good. It'll be a good chapter in the book.
But that's what happens to cannabis companies frequently. If you don't actually set your bank accounts up or your payment processors as stating you are a cannabis company or an MRB, your payments get held, your bank accounts get shut down. You all of a sudden you go into your account and you can't get in anymore, and you ask what's going on, and we've held your money, and it takes a fight to get it back. So, when I talk to my clients, even things that seem so simple as, can we take payments via PayPal? Sometimes the answer is no, because certain, I'm not going to call out PayPal or other people, I'm just using them as an example, but certain payment processors will also shut you down. So you got to be careful.
And I still think, and David, we were just talking about Jeff Sessions and the Cole memo. And again, what else do I have is the last few years of experience looking at this whole thing. I really think that was one of the biggest issues, that when Jeff Sessions came in and took that Cole memo up and he ripped it up, all the banks got freaked that, oh my God, this guy's going to come after us if we take any kind of cannabis related funding. But yet, I say that, and then I read about millions and millions of dollars of investment dough continue to pour into the industry. So there's banking going on. It's just it's keeping people like yourself and the lawyers in the world in business, right?
Well, that's why, I would advise anybody that's getting into this, you need a specialized lawyer and a specialized accountant, especially right now, because there is such a difference between state laws and federal laws. Every state has their own set of laws. I mean, going back to New Jersey right now, that's what's taking New Jersey so long to pass the laws. They're trying to work out every single detail. The latest detail I saw today that's holding things up is what happens to an under 21-year-old individual who gets caught with cannabis on them. Right. Certain people want to keep it, you still get arrested for it. Others think it should be like a parking ticket. And I think they're heading more towards the parking ticket model right now. Yep. But those are the types of decisions that are holding up the legislation here in New Jersey.
Right. In fact, I was just going to bring up New Jersey because that sounds exactly. And in fact, if I remember correctly, the amount of fine goes up based on the amount of cannabis on your possession if you're under the age of 21, right?
It does. Yep. From what I saw today in the latest draft, that's the way they have it.
Yeah. Any insight on why it's taken the New Jersey legislature so long to come to an agreement, or is it the same problems that every governing body has with this plant?
It's pretty much the same problems. It's politics in general, and New Jersey politics in general are a little bit more complicated often. But I think what you're also seeing is there's still some people, that are on the decision makers, the lawmakers, that really don't want this to pass. So they are trying to still make it very stringent, even though the people have spoken that they want this. So an example is in the beginning, a perfect example is why the first bill that was about to make it to a vote got pulled back the last second. It included nothing for home grow. Home grow was still illegal under the first draft of the bill. And so many people were calling their, state congressmen and saying, this is not right, that they actually did at the last minute pull it back so they could refine it and start, include home grow up to a certain amount, I think is where they're at right now.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, New York is going through that same issue. Morgan Fox just brought that up in the last half hour. And it's something that the industry is fighting hard to allow. And of course, here in Massachusetts, you have 6 plants per adult in a dwelling. If you have 2 adults in a dwelling, you can have up to 12 plants. And I asked the grower, how much harvest can you get off those 12 plants? And it's, I think he said 4.5 pounds. That's a lot of weed. Now, granted, if you have a medical reason, if you're fighting cancer and you need to extract the magical chemicals that are inside the flower, and that's the kind of amount that you could have, and growing your own medicine is a lot cheaper than having to go even to a medical dispensary and pay for it. So
especially with the taxes they're putting on it these days as well.
Well, not on the medical side, and again, another issue that's before these legislatures, there is a difference. There's no tax on the medicinal side here in Massachusetts, but there's up to 23% if you include some of those shady home agreements that David is so enamored with, right? The host security agreements are the one thing that I know David just hates to talk about, but it's part of the battle, right? It's totally part of the battle here. Where do you think it's going to go, Rick? What do you hear in your local papers? I want to go back to the accountants, the networking accountant thing that you were at, the round table that you were at the other day, because I'm guessing, the discussion had to include, what's going to happen if this is in the law versus what's going to happen if that's in the law.
Yeah. So the meeting I was at the other day was actually for the cannabis committee of the New York State Society of CPAs. So I'm part of both New York and New Jersey. So that was focused a little bit more on the New York side, but of course, a lot of New York is based on New Jersey. And the focus of that, at the time of that meeting, Cuomo had just made a statement the day before that he really wanted to, start looking to legalize cannabis,
right,
along with his other statements about all the taxes he wants to, increase, and he wants it for the tax revenue.
Yeah.
And, the thought process there, and I think it goes to both New York and New Jersey, is if we tax this too high, people are still going to go to their underground dealers to get the product. And you're seeing that even in New Jersey on the medical side. There's people I know that have their medical cards and they still refuse to go to a dispensary to get it, because what they've told me is, I walk in, there's 1 or 2 strains available. It's whatever they have that day.
Yep.
And the cost is 2 to 3 times what it cost me to just go get it from my friend that I usually get it from.
Right.
So the cost really is going to be an impact to this whole thing.
And yet the whole point of legalization is to figure out exactly where this cannabis was grown, what's in it. It's been tested. The impact or effect it might have on you. That's the reason why I go to a medical dispensary as opposed to finding someone I can meet in a parking lot. Those
Right.
days are over now.
Yeah.
But I understand the cost factor. It's always, David, you understand supply and demand. You're my supply and demand guy and all this. Do you have any idea, David, about the size of is it the canopy growth in New Jersey? Isn't that what you guys call it? Isn't that what you call it? As far as, how
Size
much
of the
acreage is
canopy?
available?
Yep.
What's that?
Size of canopy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no insight on that one, Jimmy.
No insight. Appreciate
No.
that. Okay, great. So you left me out hanging. That's okay. And I'm not going to put Rick on the spot. Okay?
It serves him right for putting me in the spot with the court cases.
That's right. That's right. Name 5 court cases. Did you feel like you were back in like business school again, right?
I felt like I was in school and didn't do my homework last night and got called on.
Well, the good news is I see that we have a new person in our Zoom room, and I'm looking forward to seeing him again. It's his second time on Cannabis Chat on a Friday afternoon. Now, we won't hold him for being a little late to the party. Okay? But Paul Josephson from Duane Morris is here with us, and we want to welcome him into our Cannabis Chat. And another New Jersey guy, Rick, so you won't be the only one. And I know David now. David, you asked Paul the question that you asked Rick LaNeve, and he would, he had a tap dance a little bit. See if Paul can handle that question. Boy, we'll put him right. But this is the reason. This is what happens when you get a little late. We're going to put you right on the spot. Go ahead, David.
Okay.
You ready, Paul?
I'm ready.
It's not going to be terribly hard. What, in your opinion, what do you think of the top 5 marijuana tax court cases?
The top 5 marijuana tax court cases?
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know. Look, I think that, Harborside is the one that kind of always comes to the top of my mind. Beyond that, I'm not going to sit here and try to con your audience that I'm a master in the tax court cases. So I'm not going to guess beyond Harborside. That's what I've got a lot of tax partners for.
There you go.
So I'm going to punt on that one. So I apologize.
Don't worry, I punted on it as well.
By the way, Rick LaNeve, who's from Accounting Buds in New Jersey. Paul is also with us here.
Yep.
And he punted. Actually, he did get half quarter credit because he came up with Harborside. So I'm going to give you credit, Rick. I feel like the professor now. Paul, first of all, I want to
20% credit.
That's right. Hey, and more importantly, thank you. You were great your first appearance on the show. So I'm really happy that you're back, and I appreciate it. But what's your insight on what's going on with the New Jersey legislature right now? What's the process? Where are we with this, with the final legalization draft of this law? Where are we?
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and thank you so much for the compliments. And I'm not going to blame 420 for my being late for this, but I know how important 420 is in the podcast. But I'm not going to blame that.
Okay.
Actually, been tied up on some New Jersey licensing matters, and so my apologies for being late to you and your audience. So, great question. Let me try to boil it down. We talked about this actually in my last appearance to some degree, that the legislature and the governor were at a loggerheads. The bill is sitting on the governor's desk waiting to be signed. The governor's concerned about the bill. He's been obviously a big proponent of it from the beginning. But the concern that the governor has at the moment is that the bill has no penalties in there for underage possession or use of cannabis. He is up for re-election this year. He, I think, is concerned not only because he's up for re-election, but I think as a matter of just, policy that, his view is we have penalties for underage drinking, and it would be a mistake to have a cannabis law in New Jersey that did not have something in the parallel for underage possession and use of cannabis. The legislature, I think, has a different view that's being driven at the moment by the Legislative Black Caucus, which is very, very concerned that these sort of policies and those sorts of criminal or quasi-criminal provisions, because what's been talked about is a fine of somewhere around $100 or $250, for underage use or possession. The legislators have been concerned. The Black legislators are very concerned about what they have seen in their communities for the last God knows how many years, that this is a pretext for pulling over, stopping and frisking. And so they're at a loggerheads on it. The legislature has said that they are not going to give the governor the companion bill that he would like that provides for those civil penalties for underage use. And the ball is kind of in the governor's court right now as to what he's going to do next. He's got three options. One is to sign the bill. One is to conditionally veto the bill. And technically, the other is he can do nothing and allow it to become law. That seems to be unlikely in my view. And we are all sitting here in New Jersey anxiously awaiting, hopefully the governor signing the bill. But it seems to me that, notwithstanding the issues that we've had with enforcement and the misuse of the criminal statutes, as long as we have some sort of a penalty on the book for underage drinking, it seems kind of hard to have a cannabis scheme that does not have a similar, let's call it disincentive for minors to be possessing and using.
All right. So is it a felony, underage drinking, a felony in
No.
New Jersey, or a misdemeanor? It's a misdemeanor.
No, it's a misdemeanor, and quite frankly, in fact, I was talking to a couple of my municipal prosecutor friends because I asked them, what happens when a white kid walks into your courtroom charged with underage drinking? And the honest answer from the municipal prosecutors is, hey, listen, most of the time we wind up dismissing those charges, and they tend not to go anywhere. But nevertheless, there are circumstances where they will proceed. Where they will proceed. So it's a and here I think the governor isn't even looking for a disorderly persons offense, which is what we kind of call a misdemeanor here in New Jersey, but rather a civil penalty that would just be a fine. And frankly, in all likelihood, in most cases, would probably more often result in some sort of a referral to, either some sort of community service, or we have a system of drug courts here in New Jersey. So my expectation would be that a minor who got charged, under under such a provision would likely wind up in a drug court, subject to judicial supervision, but in a much different sort of a scheme than your classic criminal case. The drug courts here in New Jersey have been, I think, pretty well designed to be more about rehabilitation and restoration than they are about punishment.
Well, I'm all for that. I'm all for reform and education than penalties, because I think penalties it doesn't make any, at this point in our development as a society, I just don't see penalties and punishment working, especially for both of these. I'm talking about underage drinking. And by the way, I'm sorry, I believe that 18 should be the age, not 21. But let's work on just getting the damn law done first before we try to change it, right?
That's right. And by the way, unfortunately, you have a former New Jersey legislator to thank for the 21-year-old drinking age around the country. That was our former U.S. Senator Frank Lautenberg, who was a great guy and a great friend. But back in the day, he was the guy who got the federal government to condition all the funding for states on, if they wanted highway funds, they had to up their drinking age from 18 to 21. So I'll apologize for the late senator's over enthusiasm, but I hear you loud and clear. And I think that we're the other piece. We're in a time of just incredible change, and one of the we've gone through some awful things over the last year, and I'm not speaking so much about COVID, as awful as that was, but the racial tensions and the protests that we saw last year. And we're in a time where I think our kids and our grandkids are going to look back, and it's going to be a time that's going to be akin to the 60s in terms of just some radical changes in how this country thinks about things. And we're going through a moment right now where, frankly, a lot of folks in this country have no idea. Forget about cannabis, forget about drinking. We've done many studies here in New Jersey in the past about the impact of civil fines on the minority communities, civil fines, the impact of civil fines that are imposed on minorities and low-income people generally when they violate the traffic laws, and how a simple moving violation or a parking ticket that left unanswered and unresponded to can suddenly turn into a tremendous financial millstone around the neck of somebody. The $50 parking ticket turns into a $500 fine, and then there's a loss of the license. And it all sounds like, oh, well, this is all civil, no big deal. But in the meanwhile, that person has now lost their means of any chance of a job in a state like New Jersey. So we're in a moment right now where we all have to recalibrate our thinking. We have to listen carefully to these communities that have been telling us loud and clear, very loud and clear in the last year, about how our justice system has not only not served them well, but has actively undermined their ability to succeed in this country.
100% behind that effort too. I know it. All right, David, I'm putting you on the spot. You got something for Paul? Come on.
I think everything he said is spot on. And I agree with him that we're at a point where socially people are going to start to look at this. The criminalization of marijuana is nuts. And I happen to also agree with him, not so much on the issue of the color lines, though what he talked about with the white kids getting arrested for drinking underage, I think there is a big disparity. But when you start to apply a lot of the rules that we have that are designed for middle class people who have some income to lower income communities, exactly. It's crushing because everything is relative in life, right? And all of a sudden, a $50 fine that you can't pay, like he said, balloons up. It's like there's an old joke, if you take a parking ticket and you leave it in your glove box long enough, it's like a savings bond. By the time you get it, it's worth a lot of money, right? Just in the wrong direction. So
what are we going to do about it, guys? Anyway, here's the thing. First of all, I'm going to call a little bit of an audible. Paul and Rick, if you'd like to stay for the next half hour, we're going to invite you. If you have something to do, by all means, I understand. You've both been great. I thank you. We're going to take a break, okay? And then we're going to welcome in two more representatives of the great Garden State of New Jersey. Our friend Rob Mejia, the professor from Stockton University, and also Dan Ulloa, the editor of Heady NJ. They're going to join us after this break. So if you guys want to stick around, you are certainly invited to, but you don't have to. I'm not putting you on the spot. You get to decide whether you're here after the break or not. I thank you for joining us both, but we've got to take a break, and we'll come back on the other side, and then there'll be a big surprise, whether we've got 4 in the room or 6 in the room. Don't go away.
Getting into accounting actually started when I was younger. It's a funny story. My grandparents used to watch us every summer, me and my sister, and my grandfather owned stock in the company that he worked for, the electric company they'd worked for forever. And he retired, he would check that stock price every day. So it'd be something fun that I would do with them. We'd look at the newspaper, I'd check the stock price with them. And I think that's where my love of numbers came in. And it turns out that I didn't even realize this when I picked accounting as my major. My other grandfather, my father's father, was an accountant as well. He was much older when I knew him, so I didn't realize he was an accountant, but I guess it kind of runs in the family.
Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse Podcast. We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the network.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. And you know, as a sportscaster on TV and radio for 25 years, people always thought I was an expert on sports. They used to come up to me at bars and go, "Hey, sports guy, are the Bruins going to win the Stanley Cup or what?" I didn't know then, and I don't know now. Just because I reported on sports and talked intelligently about my love for sports, I was not an expert. I was a talk show host, an anchor, a reporter. Sure enough, the same is true in the cannabis industry. Now, even though it's been around for thousands of years, research is just beginning. The difference, of course, is that there are no real experts in the cannabis space. However, we all believe that we're experts in our own field. For instance, we at Pro Cannabis Media have 75 years of combined experience in commercial media, buying, production, and strategic market planning. Now, we want to help you control your message. After all, you're probably considered an expert in your field, whether that's lighting or containers, law, interior design, or even security systems. We already have an expert in the insurance business for MRBs, that's marijuana-related businesses. Bill Perrier from Charles River Insurance is our expert. He's a member of our PCM Gold Club of experts, and he explains that one of the largest insurers in the world is now writing insurance for cannabis farmers.
Lloyd's of London, 325 years old, the standard bearer in the market, is with a company called Chesterfield Brokers that have launched this parametric insurance for crops.
Insurance is all about timing, and it's a shame we couldn't have got these programs up for the farmers and the other cannabis growers who've been really affected by those West Coast fires.
We also have an accountant for the cannabis space. He's a CPA, Rick LaNeve of Accounting Buds, and we rely on both of them for their expertise, and we showcase their expertise in our news and talk shows. In fact, we'll put them inside our original content, and we can talk to them. It's kind of like product placement. So show off your knowledge inside our content as we position your expertise in your field. And you do that by joining our Cannabis Gold Club of experts. That's where you get a chance to show our audience your expertise in your field. This group of entrepreneurs will serve as a referral network in order to generate leads for your business and, of course, build your expertise because it'll be shared during our weekly news and talk shows. So, if you want to take advantage of our following and the original content we produce on a weekly basis, contact me, Jimmy Young, or our sales team today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
All right, welcome back to Cannabis Chat Live on Friday here at Pro Cannabis Media. David Rabinovitz and I are here every Friday from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern to talk about the emerging cannabis industry. And today we are focusing on the Garden State, New Jersey, as they continue to try and start their adult use legalization that was voted in on Election Day. And now, of course, we've got the room filled with New Jersey people because both Rick and Paul stuck around, and I appreciate that. But we're joined by our friend Rob Mejia, professor at Stockton University, as well as our community harvest guy. And now we're joined by the editor of Heady, New Jersey, Heady NJ. His name is Dan Ulloa. I hope I did it right. Did I do Ulloa?
You did.
I've been practicing that. So, Dan, thank you so much. I want to start with you, if you don't mind, Dan. Looking at it from your perspective, how would you describe the state of the legislation right now as it's starting to head up to the governor's desk?
So we're in a really weird position right now, and we've been in this position for more than a month now, more than 30 days. Certainly, whereby the legislature passed the bills. They passed the enabling legislation and the criminalization legislation December 17th. These are the bills that at one point had stalled, where Governor Murphy had to sit down with Senate President Steve Sweeney and our Speaker of the Assembly, Craig Coughlin. They sat down, they made an agreement, and that's the bill that we now have. That it took some time. We had our hearings. We had plenty of hearings, Appropriations Committee, Senator Scutari, Judiciary hearings, and the bill passed the legislature, and here we are in this weird position where the governor is like, "Oh, I made an error. We didn't actually read this. Must have said." Now he wants to have a penalty on minors, on rather those who are under 21 and they're caught with a little cannabis. What do we do with that? You make them a little fine? You make them go to drug rehab? You make them go to community service? Or do you just yell at them a little and scare the fear of God in them? That's really like this issue that's really sticking here, and it's been really difficult. The issue came to a head right for New Year's, whereby Governor Murphy announced out of nowhere he wasn't going to sign the bill when everybody, I think, was waiting for a signing ceremony. Details there, and now we have to pass a cleanup bill. So they obliged him. The bill passed committees, but we don't have the votes in the legislature for cannabis, for this cleanup bill, because they can't really agree. Because some people say even like a slap on the wrist. What's the slap on the wrist to somebody is the start of like down this road whereby we create a second class of citizens who are felons who are disenfranchised.
Gotcha. Hey, and Rob Mejia is with us as well. Rob, one of the things we were talking about with Paul Josephson, the attorney that's with us from Duane Morris, was the 18 versus 21. As someone who is a college professor, okay, what really is the difference between an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old when it comes to maturity and underage drinking or underage use of cannabis? I mean, the 18-year-old is really that much different than the 21-year-old?
Well, we're working with college students on a daily basis. It just comes down to the individual. There are some 18-year-olds who are more mature than you and I, and there are some who really feel like they are so very young. I mean, the biggest thing is this brings up one of the big issues. It's what about the kids? And the thing is, you don't want to encourage underage use, and that the brain is still developing until age 25. And actually, the earlier you start before the age of 18, those become the more problematic years, and especially if there's real high potency product that they're using. I mean, my own feeling is that I heard a proposal that makes sense, and it's the way they handle tobacco. And that is, if the person who sells it to you, they're the ones that get the penalty. And I think you should leave the minors alone. The minors have enough to do just trying to become a functioning, well-adjusted adult. So I would say that if you have somebody who's selling the product to them, they're the ones that should get the fine, and not the minor. Just warn the minor, let them go on their way, and focus on the seller.
Well, there you go. David, you got anything for us? I'm waiting to see. I want to make sure you're still awake and with us.
I'm still awake and with us. No, I'm actually curious about where, like Dan talked about, where things are at. When do you think New Jersey, to anybody who's any of our guests, when do you think they're actually going to work out the regulations? I mean, it just seems they get to that point and then it falls apart again. Then they get there and it falls apart again. I mean, it's another one of these things where the citizens say, this is what we want of the people that we've elected. And then the people that they elected say, you're really not that bright. We need to redo it for you. You know, that's what happened up here. And it looks like it's going that way down in New Jersey. When do you think they'll actually get this resolved so you've got an industry that can start?
Ask someone directly, David.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Dan.
There you go.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one, I'll say. Right now, we are in this weird limbo period. Technically, we're legal right now. There's a few people calling themselves legal right now, selling a few things here and there. Ideally, like to work it out, I think like in the next couple weeks on some level, and we'll have it. Like everybody wants it, and they're right there. They just have this one little thing to do. And I think what the problem is, like we have a very contentious politics as being New Jersey in our state house. So unfortunately, I think it's one of the issues that is mired in the larger issues between the governor and the more progressive governor and the more moderate state senate president. Who, you know, there's a little one-upsmanship. There's been some issues there where they were fighting, especially over tax credits for companies. That was a big issue. And millionaires' taxes, that was a really big issue. Where they didn't really have common ground. It took a while to make a deal, and the acrimony from it hurt cannabis as like a secondary issue. So I think that's like one of the reasons it might be we're seeing that way. And we're also living in a pandemic. That's slowing things down. I can't go hanging around the state house running into legislatures the way like I imagine I would have been otherwise.
So
I don't know.
That'll probably help. It'll go along a lot faster, Dan. If I can weigh in on this from the lawyer's standpoint, the timing on this under the bill is that, and the bill that's sitting on the governor's desk, is that once he signs it, the Cannabis Commission will have 6 months to adopt regulations that will become automatically and immediately effective. So in a perfect world, if the governor signs a bill, let's say it takes place in February, hopefully by July or August, the 12 current licensees would be in a position, subject to approvals from their towns in which their stores are located, but they would hopefully by July or August be in a position where they could open the doors to all adult customers. Having done this stuff for 30 years in New Jersey, regulations take time. And there's a lot that needs to be regulated here. And what's unknown is how much of that work has already been done by the staff in anticipation. So, if we're lucky, we get it this summer. History says regulations take some time. But I certainly know, the governor's team, I think, is anxious to get this up and running and rolling as quickly as possible. And then, I think the follow-up question is, okay, that's fine for the 12 licensees. What about the larger industry? What about all the other folks who've been waiting so long? The folks who applied in 2019, who are still waiting to hear on their medical license applications. And the answer is a little more complicated there. But, the 2019 licensee, 2019 applicants do have a court hearing coming up on February 2nd, and hopefully those applications will get unstuck. and the department will be in a position to award some more licenses in the coming months. For those who've not already applied, the way the bill is set up, the new commission cannot put out a request for licenses until two things happen. Till the regulations that I said take 6 months are adopted by the commission. Then there has to be a 30-day roadshow during which the state has to go out and promote to all kinds of communities how they can participate in the application process. And so hopefully there'll be the opportunity to apply come September for pure recreational licenses.
I want to ask Rob something, because he and I have talked about this before. Is the legislature actually reaching out to those that are in the business, or someone like yourself as a teacher, to educate themselves more about this issue? Or are they just going into this blind and saying, oh, we got to do this because of that? And what's the read on that?
They are reaching out to a few people, but really not on a huge scale. I do have a friend of mine who was on the media panel that we were on, Faye Coleman. And Faye Coleman actually is one of the advisors. And so she does get calls from legislators all the time, and they'll ask her basic things like, how many grams are in a joint? What's the difference between hemp and marijuana? I mean, a lot of basic definitions, and then some things that are a little deeper too. So there are some people who are pursuing education. And there actually recently was a call from 2 of the senators to talk about whether we should be putting education into the middle and high schools for kids. But the other thing that I think is missing is that we're not talking a lot about state education. Every time that any state legalizes adult use, you see some problems that crop up all the time. I'll give you a quick example. One is the edibles. That once you have edibles in the market, you will see calls to poison control centers increase. And actually in New Jersey, we're already seeing that, even though we're not, well, we kind of are or not, in legal use. So in 2018, there were 14 calls to the poison center for kids who ingested THC, gummies, candy, etc. In 2019, there were 40. In 2020, there were 85. Most of that could be mitigated by, could be taken care of by parents being more responsible about stashing their products. And then also the big thing is about education, to let people know that actually what happens with edibles. So I think that I wish I would hear more conversations about how we need to put in a wholesale education program for the state of New Jersey for parents, and then we can talk about the schools as well. But I do think that you have to start with basic things. We're going to have tourists that will come into New Jersey, and let's let them know what they can and can't do right from the start. So again, I think education has been lacking in the conversation.
That's an interesting observation. Hey, Paul, I got a question for you. Have they seated all the commissioners? Do you have a full commission down there now?
We don't yet have a full commission. We have, I think, of the 5, 3 have been specifically and formally identified and nominated. There are 2 more pending appointees yet to come. Those 2 appointees are coming from would be coming from the governor.
Now, when you say nominated, does that mean they're actually seated and approved, or they're trying to get them approved?
Well, the good news here is that the way that the bill set it up is that this initial round of typically appointments to a board like this in New Jersey are subject to advice and consent in our state Senate, kind of like a Supreme Court nominee would be federally, or a cabinet member. But in this bill, in order to get up and running quickly, the appointments are automatic. So as soon as they are named, they are good. They're good to go. They don't have to do any advice and consent. That being said, the commission has not formally stood itself up yet. They don't, although they have a technical majority, 3 out of the 5. The chairwoman who has been appointed is one of the governor's nominees, and they've not convened the commission to start doing their work. And frankly, I think that's a function of they don't want to start doing their work until the bill is the adult use bill is signed.
Do they have any staff yet?
They do have staff. The most notably the current assistant commissioner of the Department of Health, who is our cannabis czar, Jeff Brown, has been tapped to be the executive director of the new commission. He's in my view, a great guy who's done wonders in turning around New Jersey's awful program. It hasn't been perfect by a long shot, but that's not all Jeff's fault. And Jeff has a very capable staff around him at the DOH currently in the medical program who are expected to all move over to the commission. So there will be staffing right away. And I know that they are going to have to expand that staff dramatically in order to deal with the amount of work that they have and the amount of applications that they're going to have coming in there.
I'd like to go back to education. Can I go back to education for a second here? Because I do get to rail about this a lot, excuse me, on this show. And I still have yet to ever hear about any kind of in-school or out to the public service announcements about both the positive effects of this cannabis plant and also the responsible use of this plant. There is nothing in place here in Massachusetts. Traditional media is still shying away from this. No one is talking about how this plant can enhance your life. Now, let's go back to the kids. There are kids out there who are sick, okay? And there are documented case after case after case of a lot of these kids' parents' last resort medication is cannabis. Where I'm going with this is it's going back to education. I believe it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Everybody knows that moms dictate a lot of things around the house, okay? Moms have been cannabis advocates in Colorado, in Washington State. It's documented. What I'd like to see is a lot of mothers trying to get education in the schools. And a lot of people know this about me. One of the things that pisses me off more than anything else about teenagers is the binge drinking that goes on. They don't drink to get drunk. They drink to pass out. So they're out of control. And that's alcohol. Any parent that I talk to about the dangers between these two products that teenagers are going to get their hands on, do not think just because there's going to be a misdemeanor of $400 if a teenager is walking around with a couple of joints in his pocket, that's going to happen. It's not. Kids are always looking to push the envelope when they're told that they cannot do something, and they're going to do it. And by the way, there are adults out there. Rob, you mentioned the emergency room visits, okay? Edibles are dangerous. You have to learn to start low and go slow. Yeah. But where's that messaging in the public, right? It doesn't happen. We're not allowing it. And it's not, in no state do I hear of any public service announcements. And I'm just throwing that out there and I'll go to Rob first, because I know he has an opinion about that.
I do. It is sorely lacking. I mean, Colorado has a little bit of, I actually read the curriculum that Colorado gives to their middle school and their high schoolers. And it actually, for the most part, was okay, pretty straightforward. They did have a couple of alarmist things in there, but they did miss out on a couple of big opportunities. And as you mentioned, Jimmy, even in New Jersey, we have a couple qualifying conditions that definitely speak to children. Autism is one of them. Epilepsy is another one. So there certainly are children who are benefiting from cannabis, but nowhere in that curriculum did it ever acknowledge that. So I'm thinking, if you happen to be a student and you happen to be one who has to take that medicine, that's probably another way that you may well get shunned. And you're taking a course that says, for the most part, that what you're doing is negative. But for you, it's a huge benefit. And Colorado also does some public service announcements, but they're more like what you can do in the state and what you can't. They're not really talking about the benefits or many positives. It's basically to keep tourists out of trouble is what it is. That's all.
Right. And shouldn't that education of our children, this is what alcohol does to your brain, this is what cannabis can do to your brain. You have to share that information with the kids, because they're not going to make smart decisions in their teenage years. They're just not. I know I didn't, and I don't know about you guys, but point is, all right, we do need to educate as parents, as responsible users of this plant, advocates for this plant. We have a responsibility to educate young people about this. Okay. And I'm talking the benefits and the dangers. Balance it. If you look at the alcohol versus cannabis debate, it's really a no-brainer. It really is, even though both affect the brain.
I do think one interesting approach would be to go more to the parents, because I do find that even in my classes, one of the very best things that happened is I had a few students who said, my parents were really kind of anti me taking this course. They didn't really want me to engage with cannabis. They didn't know about it. They certainly didn't know about the history of prohibition. They didn't know about the racism that's baked into it. And over time, my students began to teach them about the truths about cannabis. And the nice part was that you saw the parents come around. And at the last session, I actually invite parents that they can come in and hear the class too, so that we can answer their questions. Because I think that it does trickle down. They then tell their neighbors, they tell their kids, they tell their nephews, nieces, everybody. So I think that's an important part. It's harder to get to the parents, I think, but it would be pretty amazing if we could put together some educational program that engaged public, parents, and kids. That would be phenomenal.
Well, we know they exist, right? Parent-teacher organizations exist. Granted, during the pandemic, everything's been screwed up in our school systems anyway right now. But maybe, and you know, guys, I'm going to throw it out there. Maybe that's something Pro Cannabis Media could do, is put together a room of medical doctors, nurses, and those who have experience with this plant to talk to parents. You know, the old how to talk to your children about drugs and alcohol. Seems to me we can have those conversations now. We've certainly got enough, even though we need more research. I get that. But it is a challenge. Look, parenting, how many of us are parents? Okay. It's the most challenging job we ever have had. Right, Paul?
You got it.
I think you guys are right, though, because I think in this situation, there's still a lot of people over a certain age where there's a big stigma against cannabis. I see it with my parents. My parents both have major medical conditions. I've tried to get them to try medicinal marijuana. I've talked to people I know in the industry that are experts in it. They've offered to get on calls with them, and they won't do it because they look at cannabis as the 60s or the flower children, and that's what their perception of it is or worse. So I actually think Rob's got a great idea in terms of teaching the parents. But I think by teaching the kids and using the kids to teach the parents is actually a great way to do it as well.
I will tell you this, guys. Kids know more about it than the parents do. Okay?
No doubt.
And if you don't believe that, be a kid again. Because I knew more. Look, it's not even worth looking at my own personal experience, because I was an ADHD boy being boy, right? And the only time I could hyper focus in school was, guess what? When I used it before school. Oh, really? I'm not proud of that. And I'm not saying that anybody who knows me knows I might be a little off. Okay, I get it. But you know what? I was a functioning member of society for the last 30 or 40 years. Some might debate that too. But for the most part, my point is there are opportunities here that I don't think the industry is taking advantage of. And it's something that it's one of the reasons why I started this company in the first place, is to tell the stories of the industry, to tell the stories of the people who say, you know what, cannabis saved my kid's life. You know how many are out there?
Oh, what?
Thousands. Okay.
There's a lot of heartwarming stories that way.
Dan, do you do that when you're writing? How many times have you heard that quote? Cannabis has saved my life. Cannabis has changed my life.
Oh yeah, it's such great stories. Like especially some people here in New Jersey. We have Marijuana Mommy of founder Jesse Gill has a really great story like that. My friend CMMJ, remember Mike Brennan's great story about that he had like severe back pain. He was on opioids, that he could barely function. And then with cannabis, now he's around. He travels. We went to Washington to Normal together. He's an active guy that way. And Jesse has a very similar story. It's really this is why I feel like the government has lied to us. This is like Nam. If you want to have reference from the 60s, they lied to us about Nam in the Pentagon Papers, lied to us about cannabis. What else are they lying about? This is a plan that helps people. So I have ADD myself, for example. I'm looking for something that would help that. I haven't found that. I have found something for my stomach. It's another. I'm a chronic patient. I'm not so like I'm not a patient without myself that way, but it is like one of those issues where it should be.
Right.
I think, look, you can never have enough education. I feel like I've spent the better part of my last 4 years running around the state of New Jersey trying to educate legislators. Apparently not well enough because they're all calling Rob with some cannabis. Like, I don't even know if it's Cannabis 101. It sounds like it's cannabis preschool type questions. Right. But municipal officials and I Jimmy, I'm entirely on board with you that the notion of more deliberate education targeted at each of these audiences is really critical. I think the industry itself is a little bit constrained on kind of two fronts, because certainly when it comes to educating towards minors, there are very clear limitations on their ability to advertise and to spend money communicating on anything that's targeted towards a minor. Right. So efforts by organizations like PCM, by folks like Rob and Stockton, serving as a resource to parents, to teachers, to schools is hugely important. And I'll tell you what the most undereducated segment of the entire population is of all of them: doctors.
Oh, and on that note, the Massachusetts Medical Society recently, within the last few weeks, has taken the word marijuana out and replaced it with cannabis and is now recognizing it as a medicinal product in Massachusetts. That's great. So that's huge. And I will tell you, sure enough, the medical community, the medical cannabis community, some of them may have missed that little item in the paper, but we actually had Dr. Eric Ruby on, a very well recognized and respected pediatrician who was the only pediatrician in the state of Massachusetts who could actually prescribe medical cannabis to under 21-year-old kids who were sick. Okay. And he just retired. So you can imagine what's going on now if you're a parent of a child who needs this as its medicine. And it is plant medicine. I don't even like to refer to it as a drug. I really don't. It's a plant medicine. If we can have plant diets, okay, and I'm surrounded by vegans in my personal world, okay? I'm surrounded by them. I get it, okay? But we have to put it in front of the public because that stigma is there, and it's never coming down until those that believe in reefer madness are going to hear about the research, these anecdotal stories that are so important to tell. Is there any New Jersey media that actually tells positive, as a cannabis reporter, or tells the positive? Who's that?
Well, Dan obviously is out there doing a lot of work on it, but right. We I guess our leading newspaper used to be called the Star Ledger. Now it goes under NJ.com. They have they set up about 2 years ago a subscription service called Cannabis Insider that is extensively covering the industry. Although they are behind a paywall, I think most of their articles tend to come up, kind of go across and become free about a week or so after they're on the subscription service. And so there certainly has been pretty good coverage from one of our leading outlets. Our other newspapers certainly, see that it's a big thing. Many of them are more focused on kind of, to the extent that they have the staffing to even do it these days, what's happening in various towns at the local level, and that's after the doctors. That's really the next place where in New Jersey, and I'm sure everywhere else, the success of these programs is really going to be borne out, because we talked before about the timing on when's it going to be that we can get these adult use stores open. Once the governor signs that bill, that's great and that's fine, but guess what? We got to go out and convince every single town, not every town, but we got to go out and convince the local officials to allow adult use in their towns. And I will tell you that I am sitting here talking with municipal officials now, municipal officials who in their town, 67% of the people voted in favor of this referendum, and they are I will just say they are concerned and reluctant to allow existing medical cannabis dispensaries to go adult use in their towns, even though they've had these dispensaries in their towns for several years now without any incident.
Interesting. That's the NIMBY group. They're not in my backyard. That's
Yeah, it's great to have it in Newark. It's great to have it in Patterson. Keep it out of my town.
Yeah. And yet they have a medicinal dispensary, which, okay, I get it. Look, there's I believe it's 91% in the most recent poll recognize that cannabis has medicinal qualities. Okay, so that should be a majority last time I checked, but it still is not getting into these towns. Now, David had some experience with these host agreements, Paul, that he can share. Because you guys in New Jersey are going to go through this now, dealing with these NIMBYs. David, when you went before town councils, how much education did you have to do at that level?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, and you still have to do that even today. You got to remember, if you're into the industry, you're reading about it. Like Paul said, you're getting behind the paywall and you're staying up to date. You're hearing what Dan has to say, listening to people like Rob, going to people like Rick for advice, and you know it. But if you're running a municipality, marijuana is just a sideshow. It's really not what running the municipality is about. It's just one small issue that's all of a sudden getting a lot of, not even a lot, it's getting some airplay. But you've got all kinds of problems. You got municipal problems, you got COVID, schools, and then you got a deluge of people who want to come in. You got 40 people competing for the 2 store locations that you're going to allow, and it becomes overwhelming. And if you don't take I try to approach it from the angle of, if I was sitting on a municipal board, what would I really want to hear? I don't want to hear about what the interior of your store is going to look like. I want to hear about what's the impact upon the community, positive, negative. What are you going to do to avoid it? Are you going to create jobs? Are you going to create tax revenue? And then tell us the things that everybody's worried about and explain it a little clearer. And I found that when you do that, the municipalities, appreciate it and they tend to respond better. But we don't know what New Jersey's, right? They haven't put the regulations together. So you don't know how much local control there's going to be. If they look up at Massachusetts, hopefully they're not going to do what we did. I mean, we're very provincial up here, very colonial. So the local municipalities have to have a big say in anything that goes on. But the flip side is, they've made it so difficult. The whole host community agreement process is excruciating.
Do they ask in New Jersey, any of you guys, before you even apply for a license, do you have to have a location under agreement, a lease? Rick LaNeve?
Signed. The lease signed.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's I've written a lot about that. That means that your industry is going to be controlled by the landlords. And that the people who've got the most money who can lock, right? Paul, you said that you've got medical applicants that have been sitting since 2019 and now have sued the state, and their case is coming up, but they need to get those applications moving before anything else happens. Well, if that's the case, right, you got to have deep pockets. If you've got a lease and you've been paying on that space since 2019, you got a year and a half of rent. And it's probably rent in some nice locations. And because you mentioned the word marijuana or cannabis, all of a sudden the rent gets jacked up by anywhere from 20 to 50%. And if it's a really great location, it can get jacked up by a multiple of the regular rent. You have to have deep pockets. And that's what marginalizes a lot of the social equity applicants and a lot of the smaller operators. Right. So,
and David, the other wrinkle as far as real estate goes is you have to find a place that's not owned by a federal bank, because they're not going to let you do the lease. So it has to be private, or it has to be local. You have to own it outright. And then New Jersey is the most densely populated state. So you have to have a place that's 1,000 feet away from schools, daycare centers, pools, libraries, churches. I mean, the list goes on and on. As I've told Jimmy before, mentioned that there are some municipalities in New Jersey, because we have more than 450, that you can take the tape measure 1,000 feet from any of those places, and there is nowhere to build anything. So some places get taken off the list right away. And then you have the NIMBYs, you have the zoning, you have the prices. I mean, it's just, I don't know how some people even get this started unless you are an MSO and can kind of really wait it out and have good connections.
Yeah, that's what people really don't like, and is really like unfortunate. Like instead of like the local entrepreneur, for example, and it really is difficult. Like in these towns, like so. Just this week, I wrote that Red Bank was like for it, but they couldn't find the right location. And Bayonne and Asbury Park aren't going to move on the regulations on the local level because we're in this gray area on the state level.
Yeah, and going back to one of the earlier points too, is the last in-person conference I was at here in New Jersey, which was probably about a year ago at this point in time. The number they were throwing around was, in order to even think about trying to apply for a license, you got to have 10 to 15 million ready to go. But that's the number I kept hearing, between the lawyers, the accountants, the lobbyists, the leasing you have to have ready in place to just hold on to the land for so long. It's not, your mom and pops.
Right. For cultivation, I think that number is right. My gut, and what I tell folks who just want to do a dispensary is it's still a big number. And I think you're looking at a bare minimum of $500,000. But if you are really, prepared to really do it right, you probably need closer to $1 million, so somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million.
Yeah.
Is really what you're looking at just to do a simple dispensary license. And, that's why it's so important. David, you were speaking to the social equity component here. One of the things that we've been working on, and I've been working on with State Senator Troy Singleton, is a fund mechanism that would allow MSOs and others to fund and to bring in funding for the social equity applicants, for minority women and disabled veteran-owned businesses, to provide them with low-cost capital and the technical background and the sort of information that you need and the knowledge to how to deal with municipalities, how to make that deal work with the town, that so many people who have not gone through the process, who haven't developed real estate, who haven't tried to get, look, I'm in a state where a Wawa convenience store can take 3 to 4 years just to get through the land use process. And that's putting it where an old gas station used to be. We're not talking about knocking down someone's house to put in a big gas station. We're talking about converting something. So, it's a here in New Jersey, it's not for the faint of heart. But the good news is, I think that the bill does certainly have provisions in there to provide New Jersey individuals the opportunity to participate in these groups. It will be something that will be important in the application scoring. So that certainly is a plus. But for the mom and pop, who doesn't have a source of equity, who doesn't have a lot of experience in real estate development, it's a daunting challenge in a state like New Jersey.
Hey, if you want to find a dispensary in Massachusetts, just find the power lines and follow the power lines, because they're always on the outskirts of the city, and that's where a lot of these towns put these dispensaries, because they don't want it on Main Street. They're NIMBYs, not in my backyard, not on Main Street, but we'll put them out by the power lines.
So I'll tell you, Paul, I'll make an add-on comment to that. If they're going to rely upon the MSOs to fund the smaller operators, I think what they're going to find, ultimately, it's going to fail miserably. The MSOs do a wonderful job beating their chest and saying, we're all for social equity. But if there's any place in the country where there's a test case on that, it's right here in Massachusetts. The social equity program has not really gotten off the ground for a whole host of reasons, including this host community agreement issue and the landlords and access to capital. So the Cannabis Control Commission decided we're going to finally roll out the home delivery license, and we're going to restrict it to social equity and economic empowerment applicants for 3 years. And no sooner had the smaller operators started to approach the retailers to say, I want to be your home delivery agent, that the retailers started to take huge advantage of them. Things like, you can't deliver for anybody else, or you got to give me some stock in your business for free, or I've got to have the right to buy you out after the exclusivity period is over, right? So a group went back to the commission, and the commission decided to set up a whole new license class. It's like a mini Amazon. So you can buy product at wholesale, keep it in your facility. Customers can't walk in, but they can order online, and then you home deliver it. That was the Commonwealth Dispensary Association, made up of the largest vertically integrated players, has now sued the commission to try to knock that license out. And there are some members who are leaving the CDA over it. The CDA has now taken their list down of who their members are. You can't find it anymore. Fortunately, it's been scraped and people are circulating it. But the big players love to beat their chest about how they want to help social equity. But when the rubber meets the road, they do everything they can to sabotage it. They would crush social equity like a bug if they could.
Doesn't that reflect the history of the United States, basically, when it comes to capitalism and keeping...
Well, it reflects the history of capitalism. It's greed. And if anybody remembers good old Gordon Gekko, you know why it is like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. We've had similar issues in New Jersey, and a lot of people hold similar sentiments about some of those MSOs in Massachusetts are most likely MSOs here in New Jersey,
right.
Or at least want to be. So, and people have been talking about, like, that's why we need social equity. And in part, our desire to have a socially just industry may have held up like the whole process, but in the end, it's worth it, because a lot of this, unfortunately, what drove industry or legalization initially was not like this push exactly. And it's been really hard to have like a socially just industry. But S21 though has a lot of great provisions, and people expect that the commissioner chair, Dinah Waynu, her background as the former ACLU lobbyist on this, would take these principles to heart when implementing this, which makes it all the worse that we're stuck in limbo.
Yep. Well, the city of Boston's done a good job on it. The city of Boston has a program. If you want to get, if you're looking for local approval, they have a line: non-social equity, social equity, non-social equity, social equity, and it's 1-1-1-1. So that city is actually ultimately going to become very balanced, which will hopefully work out well. But barring anything like that, I wouldn't trust the MSOs to put money up. I wouldn't trust any of the bigger established players to do anything to support social equity other than lip service.
Well, David, I hear you, and greed is a strong incentive, but I think, as Dan pointed out, we do have some good provisions in the New Jersey bill, and ultimately it comes down to the regulators in this regard, because if the regulators take social equity seriously and they hold the MSOs to commitments to support social equity, if they take the view that their job is not simply to rubber stamp a license application or an approval, but to look at the terms of the agreements that the MSOs might be requiring, or that a funder might be requiring, to prevent folks from taking advantage of the situation. Regulators have very, very powerful incentives that they can hold over the MSOs and funders if they choose to do it. It's not easy. It takes having people in government who actually understand how business works and can read a contract and can understand this. But it is possible. It is doable. And, one of the reasons why I happen to be a big supporter of Governor Murphy is this is a huge personal issue for him that he takes very, very seriously. And I think he telegraphed that, as Dan just said, by appointing who he did as the chairwoman of the new commission. He didn't appoint somebody from industry. He didn't appoint somebody who looks like me. He appointed somebody who is all about and has a deep background in social equity and social justice. And I think by putting that kind of a person in charge of the program, he's telegraphed. I can tell you, some of my MSO clients, they sat up when they saw Diana's resume. And, people are paying attention to that fact. And I can tell you, you always want to stay as a licensed operator. You want to stay on the good side of the regulators. So if you know that's important to the chairwoman of the commission, it's something that's going to become an important part of your model. But it takes that kind of leadership from the top, from the regulators, I think, to make I don't want to say constrain the capitalist system, but to put some guardrails in there and to direct those channels of the equity and to direct folks to behave themselves and to operate like good citizens and not as sharks.
There you go. And it's a perfect time. Hang on, I got to interrupt because we have a special guest. And I think
Very
it's
special.
a perfect time to bring her in because I think we all recognize that women play such a huge role in this industry now. There's so many stories about women entrepreneurs in cannabis making a difference. And one of them has just joined us. And I call it's Tara Misu, right, Tara?
Yes, that's my name. 10 years ago, I got into this and my lawyer said, don't use your real name. So I'm a pastry.
No, and it's Blazing Bakery. You're a member of the Cannabis Business Association, a board member. You were the first edibles company in New Jersey. So first of all, welcome to our forum here for New Jersey. I appreciate you taking the time. We have this thing where we're supposed to get off at 6 o'clock, but I'm going to make an executive decision and give you some time to kind of weigh in on your perspective on some of the challenges that you faced as you started in New Jersey.
Of course, yeah. So I faced challenges that thankfully most people will never have to do. I was just talking about this earlier today. I have had my social media shut down 6 times. I've been escorted out of banks. I've really been treated poorly to when this was viewed as you are just dirty, awful drug people corrupting America. And luckily, a lot of those barriers have been taken away. We have payment processing now. We have banking. We have insurance. We could walk down the street and, people don't turn their noses at us. The converse side of that is it's a lot more saturated now. So people getting in do have fiercer competition. There's a higher demand for product and quality and also regulations, QA, QC. These are all things you didn't have to think about as much. But I do warn people get into the industry and they come in so wide-eyed and the green rush and there's going to be so much fun. We're going to work in cannabis. And I say, this is a bloody industry. This is a tough industry. And if you're going to want to succeed in it, it's not cute and fun anymore. There was the tie-dyed t-shirt days when I started. Now it's, suits and IPOs and investment bankers, and you better have things buttoned up and be ready to do business. But there's greater opportunity, and there's greater opportunity forever for women. Being a woman in this industry, certainly now we have a much bigger footprint in the industry, but 97% of all VC money in cannabis does still go to men. And we need to start having greater access for women. When I started, I would be at a booth at a convention and someone would look through me and I might have a guy helping me unload boxes and say, can I speak to your manager? Because there were 100, 200 booths there and I was the only one run by women because this was a man's industry. I won't call it a boys club, but it was just maybe, I've talked about this with other guys, growers. They said maybe men just have more of a penchant to do illegal things. Yeah. But it's a better time forever for women, and New Jersey's a great market. We have this limited East Coast market. I've been fighting to open up licenses to make opportunities for women, minorities, and small business and veterans. So I wish I could have been here sooner to kind of weigh in with some relevant topics of what you guys have been talking about. But, what would you like to, is there anything you think people want to hear or I can help enlighten people on?
I definitely have a question for you, and I was very excited to see that you were going to be on the panel.
Oh, thank you.
We actually had just started talking about social justice.
Okay.
I was going to mention that one thing I was very excited about was to see that New Jersey is going to make micro licenses available. And I know that you were partly responsible for that. So I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about what these micro licenses are and will they really help get in the industry.
Sure. So I wrote the micro license. I co-authored it with Assemblyman Danielson, but I went to testify at one of his hearings, and we were talking about, big business, which there's a place for big business, but you got to have the little guy too. So I was testifying at one of his hearings, and he said, I'd like to have you show me how you can open one of these businesses with less than $1 million. and I had 4 minutes to testify. And I said, if you give me more than 4 minutes, I will show you how you can do that. And he actually took my word at that, and I came in and I helped write the legislation for the state, and I created a micro license which will give opportunities for people. And I do the comparison of these multi-state operators, these giant dispensaries we have, that's Olive Garden. I want that great little Italian restaurant down the street, and that's what the micro license does. It gives an opportunity for someone to pay their mortgage, put their kids through college, and just make a good living. And the caps are, it's all about negotiation. The caps are lower than I wanted them to be, but it's still a completely sustainable business across the board. And it's going to, we're fighting to constantly make it better. One thing that they're going to be at is these licenses can now be converted after a year to a full-fledged license. So then if you get your foot in the door with a lower point of entry, lower costs, and they hopefully won't be limited. One of the big things I've been speaking against is caps and competitions. I think it's destroying the industry. It's making it so corrupt. The micro most likely will not be capped. So you get that license, you get your foot in the door. It's half the application fee. It's still a good amount of square footage or grow or processing space. And in 1 year, if you are plateauing and you hit all your milestones, you apply for an extension and you have a full-fledged license. So I think they're a great opportunity. They're really going to open this up and stop making it a millionaire and billionaires game.
We hope so. Hey, we actually have a chat question. Joey from South Carolina. I'm sure you guys follow all the newsletters and all the, developments in different states. They're trying to get a medical program going in South Carolina. And Joey's asking, does anybody have any potential revenue estimates for South Carolina's medical program? And again, I have no idea, but if I say, I don't know, millions, I know I'm in the ballpark, right? It's just, you're right. But it's still a challenge. And I think it's great that we're starting to hear some of these stories that people can look at the barriers to entry, the laws that have been put in place. There are ways to make it work. I just hope, I hope and pray as we don't move so fast, whether that's federally or even at the state level, like New Jersey, that we do only make it for the MSOs out there. This plant was put on this earth for a reason, okay? And the people that probably know more about it than those corporate guys need to have an opportunity to get into this industry. I've been saying that for years. We've certainly talked about this issue over the last hour or so. Advice, guys, if you were in another state and that does not have legalization, and what would be the way to start the movement towards getting the question on the ballot? Is that the first step towards this, or should you talk to your legislature? I don't think talking to the legislature is a good first step, just by basically what we know now. How would you start?
So what you would do is really try to either join an organization or form an organization to advocate for cannabis. So that. So I was actually part of the coalition on the referendum. I represent the Latino Action Network. We're a grassroots organization helping Hispanic Americans here. We work on this from a social justice perspective. So then, you find organizations similar to yourselves to build a coalition and start talking to leaders in politics, about how you would do it, what their opinions are. For example, start talking to your local media.
Yeah. All right.
Jimmy, to speak to that a little bit, Dan's absolutely right. It's about, first, harnessing your citizen power in groups. Whether you start with the legislature or whether you start with a referendum really depends on what your legislature looks like and who in the legislature is willing to champion this. If you're, and I don't know South Carolina well, but I do know that several of our folks here in New Jersey, who, like Tara and others who are very active in the advocacy efforts here have been, tapped and have gone down to South Carolina and have spoken to folks down there. But I think, if you've got a legislator who has a chairmanship, has some power, has some respect and some authority within the legislature, then that's your path. If the legislators are not there, then you got to go with the citizen path. And, that means a referendum or a ballot initiative of some sort to prove to the legislators that there's support there for this.
Jimmy, I think you alluded to this before, but you talked before about the power of mothers standing up for their children.
Right.
And in some states, it did start with primarily a mother or parents who stood up for their child who had epilepsy, who went to a legislator who was sympathetic and got them to start the conversation. And as we've seen, even in very conservative states like Mississippi, if you go the medical route and if you have condition like epilepsy, it is hard for people to look past that. And so I think that at least starts a conversation. And then you add that in with advocacy, joining organizations, but I think that can be a powerful step as well.
So can I hop in?
Yeah, jump in.
Sorry.
Go for it.
All right, so I would add to that it's kind of a all those things. When we have the New Jersey medical marijuana law, it's the Jake Honig Compassionate Care Act. It was literally a young boy, Jake Honig, who was suffering, and he passed away, but his parents, made that path to advocacy, and they worked in conjunction with legislators to get that done. Now, simultaneously, you have groups like the one I have, where aside from legislation, we are also a business trade organization who are looking at the financial good that cannabis can bring to the state. Now, simultaneously, while you have the legislators and the politicians, you have the businessmen, you need the people who are just in it for the absolute, pure, this is what I eat, sleep, and breathe and bleed. And that in New Jersey, I would say, is a medical marijuana coalition. They have been staunch proponents of home grow, so really you need to mobilize everyone, because everyone, when you try to talk to someone and convince them that we should legalize cannabis, be it for medical or adult use, you're going to strike a different chord with different people. So we can't have a one-faceted movement where you just say, oh, this is the branch that's going to convince everyone this is the right thing to do. You need to come at people with as many solutions, and you need to unite. I think something that really held New Jersey back in the beginning was we had all these groups and everyone was vying to be the top group, but we're the best. We're going to lead New Jersey. We're going to lead the fight. And instead of uniting, there was infighting, which we had a common enemy, which was people who opposed legalization. And it took us a while to get that thought of unity being the bigger picture. And so as other states come on board, don't make that mistake. You're all on the same team. You need different approaches. No one's right or wrong. At the end of the day, home grow this, MSO, small, just come together, baby steps, and get it done.
I love that. And you know what, Tara? I'm going to go out and I'm going to say this right now. And I know there's a few people from my staff watching this. We're going to do a show. So we have 4 other women in the Zoom room with Tara. Sorry, white old guys. All right. I'm sorry. I'm throwing myself under the bus too there. Okay. I want a women in cannabis show. And I want to talk about it because I have so much respect. Last year at MJ BizCon, we did sponsor the Women in Cannabis event that was down there. And I met some remarkable women that are business people and successful. And, I know that you had to come in a little bit late, but we so appreciate you coming in and making an appearance. And now you get to come back now. Are you willing to do that?
I would love to come back. I'm always happy to be the token woman. But
no.
We're
not token. We're not token. That was 420. Oh, sorry. I had to do it. But Tara, you're welcome again.
Are great, but sometimes I feel like they're the other. Sometimes I feel like they put the women on the side stage and then the main stage. So even if I'm the only woman on a panel, I think as long as our voices are being heard generally, that's great too, So, but I would love to come back, and whatever you guys want to talk to, I'm always happy to, come on, fight the good fight.
Well, that's great. That's why.
And Jimmy, I do need to point out that you do have 2 brown guys here on the panel.
That's okay. Fair enough. You know what? I'm colorblind. When you get right down to it, there are other things I am too. But in the most part, Rob, thank you. Rick, thank you. Paul, and I so appreciate Dan. Everybody, when we talked about the New Jersey show, they said you got to get Tara Misu on and you got to get Dan on. So I advocated for Rick and for Rob and Paul. You're already an all-star. So I love this group. I'd like to do it again, especially when look, this is just the beginning in your state of New Jersey. There's going to be issues that Massachusetts has gone through over the last 2 years, 2.5 years since they launched this thing, or 2 and 4 months, whatever. We'll do this again. I do want to remind people that coming up after this show is our weekly Weed Talk News program. I co-host with Ry Russell from Weed Buds Radio. We talk about the variety of stories that have been in the cannabis industry over the past week. So I urge you to hang out and watch the news show as well. But for everybody in our little Zoom room, for David Rabinovitz, for Dan French, who directs this thing, I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Thanks so much for watching Cannabis Chat Live. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
There's a new boss in Washington, D.C., and President Joe Biden signs dozens of executive orders, but nothing on cannabis reform. A California credit union becomes a banking option for cannabis, and controversy about a Maine dispensary logo that regulators believe could appeal to kids. All that, plus the Jerry Garcia Cannabis Collection on Weed Talk News next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Ry Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Every week, Ry and I get together to talk about the biggest stories in the emerging cannabis industry. And this week, our top story comes from California, which also happens to be the nation's most populated state. Now, Ry, if you had to pick between descheduling cannabis or opening the banks to the industry, what would be your choice?
That's a great question, Jimmy. It seems like quite the chicken and egg debate. Can you really have banking without rescheduling?
Can you? Yes, you can. Because if you go to a credit union, you're going to get all the same services at the credit union. And that's what the California Cannabis Industry Association has discovered. Indeed. And now they've cut a deal with the North Bay Credit Union. They're opening doors to members of the CCIA. That would be your California Cannabis Industry Association. That industry in California, it generates more than 10% of the total cannabis sales in the U.S. to the tune of $5.2 billion. And it employs close to 40,000 people, all who are now welcome to enjoy banking privileges at that same credit union. A good deal for all.
Well, Jimmy, speaking of billions, do you know who is number one in cannabis revenue in the U.S.?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it's either two, Curaleaf or Trulieve, one of those two.
Well, this is like who's the richest man in the U.S., Musk or Bezos. There's so much movement and valuations can turn so drastically. But what we do know is that Curaleaf has been holding that top spot for some time now. And the industry continues to mature, and we're only going to see more mergers and acquisitions take place, like in the case for Trulieve, making some big moves toward that big B word, billions. And for more on the markets, let's check in with Deborah Borchardt of the Green Market Report. Deborah?
Thanks, guys. On Tuesday, the Balance Company said it made the strategic decision to liquidate the majority of its cannabis oil inventories at market clearing prices in the fourth quarter of 2020. The stock fell over 10% on that news. The company said that the decision will lead to a related one-time financial statement impact in the fourth quarter between $9 million and $10 million. It was a big week for announcing capital raises. Harborside upsized its previously announced raise to approximately 27 million Canadian dollars. That's an increase of $7 million due to excess demand. Auxley Cannabis Group raised $15 million in a deal with ATB Capital Markets and Cantor Fitzgerald. Cannabis software company Blackbird and payment processor company AeroPay announced a strategic partnership to bring cashless payments to cannabis businesses for online ordering. You may recall Blackbird was sold in November by its parent company, Tilt Holdings. And that's the big news this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
It looks like Arizona is ready to open its adult use market this week, much faster than many in the industry actually hoped. Why? Well, that state is offering the already existing medical dispensary licensees the opportunity to offer adult use sales as well. 40 medical dispensaries had applied for adult use licenses in that state, and now Arizona is ready to give the green light. Interestingly enough, Rye, that isn't the first time, I believe, in the cannabis industry history that medical licensees got first crack at adult use licenses.
Well, there's always so much going on with these state regulators. And really, the next question is, what states are ready to move into the world of legal cannabis? We know New York, the governor Cuomo has been pushing for legalization in the state of New York, and they're entering a stages of public comment for proposed legislation. And so I'm really excited because we have so many friends, Jimmy, in the cannabis industry that are attorneys that I know will be sitting in on some of these forums for public comment. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in New York. And Jimmy, for our main cannabis report, some more regulation fun. Seaweed Cannabis Company has been cited by the Office of Marijuana Policy for a violation relating to their use of a mermaid on their logo, and therefore causes concern that the logo could be attractive to children. And Jimmy, I know you have an opinion on this.
Now, first of all, we want to make sure that everybody understands. Now, they're probably looking at the graphic at this point. It's sea as in the water, ocean, SEAC, as opposed to the C in cannabis. So think about this, Rye. You know, there are a lot of similar clauses in a lot of these state regulations because the regulators do not want these logos to appeal to anyone under the age of 21. That includes like statements and designs, images, including those logos. And that's what's been going on in Maine. Now, as we look at this logo, you know, I see a mermaid. Okay, how many kids out there, you know what, and I hate to use the word kids because we're not really talking about kids. We're talking about people under the age of 21. And there's a big difference between someone who's 18 or 15 or 7 when it comes to parenting those kids. Now, for me, I like the opportunity to actually have a conversation with any kid about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. Oh, not cannabis, because cannabis is a plant. And that is a huge difference. And I know there are advocates out there always looking to make that distinction. Rye, I'm going to go out on a limb and think every morning, do you have a cup of coffee?
I do, every single day.
And do you know that 91% of Americans have a cup of coffee and use caffeine on a daily basis? And did you know that caffeine is a drug and it is addictive? Did you know that?
I did know that. Absolutely. It's concerning. I drink way too much of it.
Yeah, and so do a lot of people out there. And everybody knows if you skip a day, if you miss out on your morning coffee or your afternoon cup of coffee, what kind of reaction in your body do you have?
Not a good one. I get very grouchy myself.
I get a headache. Okay. And that's kind of where I was going with that. So I guess my point is, I understand and respect regulations are important. Do I want cartoon characters promoting cannabis for adult use sales? No, I do not. I want to make sure everybody understands that. However, I do think that these are great opportunities for parents to have these kinds of conversations with their kids. It's always kind of awkward, right? Now, you don't know this because you're not a parent, to have that sex, drugs, and rock and roll talk with your kid. It's awkward for any adult. But this is a great time and a great opportunity in legal use states to open the door and start talking and communicating to your kids. Because if you don't educate your kids, and by the way, there's an assumption here that the adults in the room would actually educate themselves about cannabis, right? I mean, education drives all arguments, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, you know, these regulations are not that different than what we have proposed in other states, Jimmy. In Massachusetts, very similar clause has been proposed and potentially put into effect, portraying or representing someone under the age of 21. And this comes from the tobacco advertising containing celebrities, endorsements, cartoons, everything you mentioned. And so it's interesting for those of you that look at this logo, you can decide what you think.
I don't know. When I was a kid, I did not dream about mermaids. Let's just say, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't. But I was an athlete, so I dreamed about sports figures, and I don't think sports figures should be endorsing cannabis for adult use. However, we can get into the fact that there are plenty of kids out there who have saved their lives through the use of cannabis directed by a medical doctor. So again, conversation, education, have those kinds of conversations with your kids. And as far as the regulations go, leave it to the regulators, because you just can't fight City Hall, can you, Rye?
You absolutely cannot. You can't fight City Hall, but we can have our voices heard in our nation's capital.
That's right. And you know, I bet you knew that there's actually been quite a few changes in our nation's capital over the last week as a new administration starts their business of running our government. Here is the DC Report with Vote Pro Podcast, Phil Adams. Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC Report. With the 117th Congress now open for legislative business, Republican Congressman Greg Steube of Florida has introduced the first new cannabis reform bill in the House. Unlike last year's MORE Act, however, the new legislation would not end the federal prohibition on cannabis. Instead, the bill would order Attorney General to reschedule cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act from a Schedule I to a Schedule III drug. The reclassification to Schedule III would protect federal employees who use cannabis. It would also remove many of the legal impediments to scientific research and would allow cannabis companies to deduct business expenses from their federal taxes. Such rescheduling is more in line with the views of President Joe Biden, who remains opposed to legalizing cannabis for adult use. In one of his last official acts as President of the United States, Donald Trump granted clemency this week to dozens of people convicted of nonviolent marijuana offenses. Last November, then President Trump received a letter from a coalition of celebrities, GOP officials, and civil rights advocates urging him to pardon or commute the sentences of 24 people serving time in federal prison, including several serving life sentences for cannabis possession. One such recipient is Craig Cecil, who, after getting the news in a call from Trump's daughter Ivanka, said, quote, "It feels like a new life. Just to know that I won't have to go back to prison is a huge relief." Cecil had been released to home confinement in June due to COVID. A Virginia Senate subcommittee on marijuana has approved amendments to the legalization bill put forward last week by Governor Ralph Northam. The bill would, among other provisions, allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and to cultivate up to 4 cannabis plants for personal use. Approval by the subcommittee clears the way for the measure to be adopted by the full Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee. From there, the bill would likely be referred first to the Judiciary and then to the Finance Committee before moving to the floor of the Virginia Senate for a vote. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Pot.
Our next story comes from a chief science officer in Encinitas, California. Dr. Joseph Romahi is warning the industry about a virus that may have spread across the country. Sound familiar? The virus is known in botanical circles as hop latent viroid, HPLVD. He believes that the cannabis industry in California has been dealing with this since 2014. According to the doctor, there are many reports of dudding. Now, Rye, do you know what dudding is?
I absolutely do not.
That's why I'm here. Okay. Dudding is defined as stunted growth, a lack of trichomes, and a lack of secondary metabolites such as cannabinoids and terpenes. So here's the weird coincidence with COVID-19. It can be asymptomatic, and it's not being tested by labs. Now, the doctor recommends cleaning harvest products with bleach. Now, that is not cleaning cannabis with bleach, okay? It is cleaning the machines that harvest the cannabis with bleach. Now, there is no report of the effects of this virus on humans, just the plants. Right?
Interesting. Well, Jimmy, it's been some time since we last spoke about the vape crisis back in 2019, and we're still learning about the risks of a lot of the ingredients that were in those cartridges. What we do know is that ingredients such as propylene glycol and phytol has been studied and published in the Inhalation Toxicology, a journal for international respiratory research. And this study has shown that phytol could be significantly more toxic. When this study was conducted on rats, the study had to be stopped when using phytol due to severe conditions, including death. Whereas the rats that show no adverse effects after 14 days of exposure to the propylene glycol. So this is very different than what we heard about at the beginning, where both of these could be potentially toxic and deadly. And we know that they both are very toxic, but we might be finding that only one of them is deadly, Jimmy.
Right. Know what's in your vape before you vape. That's all I can say. Ask for what the ingredients are and how it has been cut.
And now let's move on to our friend Solomon Israel from MJ Biz Daily International with our Canadian Cannabis Report. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canada's cannabis surplus is only growing larger. New figures show producers added more than 220,000 kilograms of marijuana last October when the outdoor fall harvest came in. That's about 50% more than the previous monthly record, which was set in the previous October. All that inventory could contribute to falling cannabis prices in Canada. Two major Canadian cannabis store chains are merging, continuing a consolidation trend in marijuana retail. Alcanna is spinning off its retail business, combining it with competing retailer YSS Corporation. The new retailer will have 53 stores across Canada, with more on the way. And Aurora Cannabis has laid off members of its internal sales team after hiring Great North Distributors to serve as its Canadian sales representative. The company wouldn't say exactly how many employees lost their jobs. Aurora has cut jobs and closed facilities in the past year as it reduces its production capacity. You can read those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
Okay, we saved the best story for last. Since I got to hang out with the Grateful Dead members 1 week back in the mid-'80s in the state of Maine, I want to share the story about the soon-to-be-released Jerry Garcia Cannabis Collection produced by Holistic Industries in California. There will be 3 strains of flower and guitar pick shaped edibles. With the blessing of the Garcia family, Holistic Industries is distributing this throughout their home state of California. The Garcia hand-picked collection will include a variety of strains like Chemdog, not to be confused with Run Dog, SFV of Indica, and Fire OG, a hybrid. So, Rai, read the quote by Trixie Garcia, Jerry's daughter, from an article in Rolling Stone. This is great.
Oh, what a powerful line meant to honor her father's long-standing advocacy for legalization. And she's noting that the family wants to create a spontaneous and harmonious cannabis experience to bring people together in the way that only Jerry could. And she continued by saying that a joint became a bridge between him and those around him.
Hey, what a long, strange trip it's been, huh? Did you like that? That's a play on a lyric. You know that, right?
I do now, Jimmy. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll do it for another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Ry Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are Two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.